In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 18, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Creighton versus Connecticut. This matchup feels less like a coin flip and more like a test of how long Creighton can hang on before the gap in talent and form shows up on the scoreboard. Connecticut rolls into this one with a record in the mid-20s in wins and only a couple of losses, something like a 24-2 kind of season, along with a dominant mark in conference play and a long run of home success that is not some fluke week of hot shooting. Creighton, on the other hand, sits right around 13-13, and that split tells a story of a group that has been fighting just to stay afloat, dropping most of its recent games and needing absolute nail-biters for the few wins it does have. It is that contrast, a steady heavyweight at home against a talented but shaky visitor, that sets the tone here. Connecticut grades out as one of the best teams in the country by the efficiency numbers, top tier overall with a top tier defense and a very strong offense, and you can see it in the way they outscore opponents by double figures on a nightly basis. They are comfortable winning by about 2 touchdowns on the scoreboard because their defense squeezes the life out of possessions while the offense patiently hunts good looks. Creighton's profile is more like a middle-of-the-pack team in a very tough league, with an offense that can look sweet when the ball is flying around on the perimeter, but a defense that leaks just enough to keep them in trouble against disciplined opponents. Honestly, that kind of imbalance is like trying to run a marathon in one good shoe and one flip-flop. It can work for a few miles, then the reality sets in. The first meeting between these two showed what happens when those different profiles collide and one side plays close to its ceiling. Connecticut went into Creighton's building and walked away with a blowout win, fueled by a storm of made threes on their side while Creighton's shooters went ice cold, especially after halftime. It was not just a whistle fest or some weird free throw parade. It was a shot quality and defensive pressure story, with Connecticut's length and discipline chasing Creighton off their sweet spots and forcing tougher, later looks in the clock. Creighton loves to lean on volume from deep, and they have had plenty of nights with double-digit makes from 3, but when that comfort is taken away, the offense can look very method-driven but not very creative. The versatility on Connecticut's side makes that even harder to solve. They can pound the ball inside through their bigs, they can play through wings who stretch the floor, and they have enough skill to pivot from one plan to another mid-game without losing rhythm. Creighton's main rotation has talent and spacing, but the front court depth is banged up, with key forwards dealing with season-ending or uncertain statuses, which chips away at their margin for error. Over the course of 40 minutes, that usually shows up on the glass, in foul trouble, or in the simple fact that the legs are heavier for the underdog late in the second half. Then there is the setting. A loud Gamble pavilion, cheap beer, a jersey going into the rafters, and a coach who has already challenged his own fan base to bring more noise all point toward a charged home environment. Those nights often turn into statement games, where the favorite is not just trying to win, but to send a message, and the rotation stays aggressive longer than usual. There is always the chance of a late backdoor cover working against the favorite. That is just part of this kind of number, but given how the first game played out, how secure Connecticut has been at home, and how shaky Creighton's recent form is, the most reasonable expectation is that the margin ends up bigger rather than smaller. As our first pick for this matchup, the Connecticut Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The first meeting landed on a fairly healthy combined number, with Connecticut breaking into the 80s and Creighton stuck in the high 50s. The path to that total, though, was very specific, with Connecticut scorching from 3 and Creighton going brutally cold from deep in the second half. Replicating that exact mix, one side hitting everything and the other side sputtering for long stretches, is not something you should count on every time these teams share the floor. Connecticut's season profile leans naturally toward quieter scorelines for their opponents. Their defense sits among the very best in the country, and the average points allowed are in the mid-60s, which is not an accident. They control tempo with patient half-court offense. They rarely give up easy transition looks, and they contest without completely losing structure. When a team plays that way, games often feel like they are moving fast emotionally, but the scoreboard does not spin as quickly as you might think. Creighton's raw scoring numbers can trick you a bit. They score at a decent clip and give up a similar amount, which on the surface suggests track meet basketball. The efficiency split tells a different story, with the offense solid but the defense lagging behind, and that is where a lot of those higher totals come from. Both sides trading buckets in looser, back and forth games. Here, with a thin front court and fewer reliable bodies to clean the glass, that same style is tougher to sustain. Fewer offensive rebounds usually means more one-and-done trips, especially against a physical, organized defense that is not giving up second and third shots. Game script matters a lot for the total, and the likely script here does not scream chaos. If Connecticut builds a comfortable lead, the pace usually slows naturally. They run their sets, use the clock, and value possessions rather than pushing for style points in the final minutes. Creighton, for its part, is not a program that turns every late deficit into a whistle-filled, foul-heavy scramble. So you get long stretches of regular half-court basketball, and those stretches can eat minutes without a flood of points. And the most reasonable picture is something where Connecticut lands in the high 70s or so, and Creighton lands in the low to mid-60s, give or take a few possessions either way. That type of outcome sits a bit under where a casual fan might expect when they think about two capable offenses and a lot of three-point attempts. Here's the thing, the defensive quality, the likely late-game pace, and the rotation issues for the road team all lean more toward a controlled scoring environment than a fireworks show. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Arkansas versus Alabama. Coleman Coliseum on a February night feels like a blender, loud, fast, and if you are not fully locked in, you are the one getting tossed around. Odds makers are giving Alabama the usual small nod at home, a slight cushion that suggests they are clearly in front, but the efficiency profiles tell a story that looks much closer to a coin flip than some comfy favorite. Both teams live in that national top 20 efficiency lane, yet Arkansas shows up as the more balanced group, a top 10 offense paired with a top 40 defense on the adjusted charts, while Alabama leans hard on a top 3 offense combined with a defense sitting outside the top 50 and allowing more than 82 points per game according to KenPom. Arkansas is pouring in close to 89 points a night on over 50% shooting from the field and about 37% from deep, and they marry that with one of the cleanest assist-to-turnover profiles in the country, which matters when they are staring at an Alabama defense near the bottom of Division I in points allowed and giving up far too many clean looks from behind the arc, something the numbers on sites like OddsShark keep reminding us. The Razorbacks are not some old-school grinded-out defensive unit, but their defense is sturdy enough to slow Alabama into honest half-court possessions, and that starts to bite a little when you remember that the Tide rotation has been stretched by recent injuries to depth forwards such as Kaiden Bristow, Collins Onyejika, and Davian Hanna, along with Taylor Bobowen bouncing in and out of availability based on the latest updates from Alabama's own reports, with game time status still not fully nailed down. On the other side, Arkansas just handled Auburn 88-75, and the key part for this matchup is that the main rotation all logged real, healthy minutes, with Darius Acuff Jr., Billy Richmond III, Malik Thomas, Trevon Brazile, Nick Pringle, Malik Allen, Carter Knox, and DJ Wagner all seeing the floor, and there have been no widely reported new injuries since that outing, so it is still reasonable, even if not absolutely guaranteed, to expect that same core to be ready here. That kind of continuity matters for a group that has already walked into unfriendly gyms this season and come out smiling, ripping Mississippi State by 20 on the road and sneaking past Oklahoma in a tight one. And when you pair that with a record against the spread sitting around 17-8, you get a team that is used to living in toss-up style environments and still rewarding anyone willing to back them. Models projecting something like an 82-79 type of result with a slight lean to Alabama on the scoreboard, while the market still leans a bit heavier toward the home side, really just underline that the gap is thin, and in a game where the underlying numbers sit close together, the extra possessions that come with the underdog label suddenly feel very valuable for the visitors. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arkansas Razorbacks to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. High-scoring energy is almost baked into this matchup before the ball even goes up, because both of these teams already live in that world on a nightly basis, and you can feel it anytime you look at a recent box score. Alabama is playing at one of the fastest paces in the country by adjusted possessions and loves to fire from three, treating the line like a runway, while Arkansas is not exactly far behind, sitting in the top group nationally in scoring with a tempo that also encourages long runs and quick shots. Recent results back that up in plain language, with Alabama dropping 90+ on Ole Miss and flirting with similar numbers against South Carolina, while Arkansas just lit up Auburn for 88, which is the sort of thing viewers remember long after they forget the exact spread. Defensively, neither side is really built to calm that storm for 40 minutes, with Arkansas giving up around 76 points per game and sitting in the 100s and 50s in field goal percentage allowed, solid but not smothering, and Alabama living closer to the edge with a defense that feels like it is just trying to score last, sitting down in the 250+ range in points allowed and surrendering more than 91 per game in those up-tempo conference shootouts. History between these programs quietly rhymes with what we see right now, with their last three meetings landing in the high-scoring zone at a combined 166, 169, and 180 points, and that was before this Alabama version turned the volume all the way up from 3 and before this Arkansas group settled into being a clear top 10 offense. Coaching styles add more fuel because both staffs are happy to let their guys run, pull early threes, and lean into pace, and public markets have already nudged the projected total higher than where it opened, which usually tells you that bettors and bookmakers are staring at the same track meet style script. In a game where both teams embrace quick shots, high three-point volume, and long stretches of momentum swings, it does not take much, maybe a short burst where one side hits 3 threes in a row, or a late stretch of free throws, for the scoring to stack up past that lofty expectation by the time we hit the closing minutes. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. BYU versus Arizona, Tucson gets a matchup that feels less like a regular conference game and more like a mood check for both programs. Arizona spent weeks stomping through the schedule at 23-0, then suddenly got clipped twice in a row by Kansas and Texas Tech, landing at 23-2 and sitting in the 4th spot in the poll. BYU had its own roller coaster, racing out to 16-1, falling into a 1-5 skid, then fighting back to 19-6 with a 7-5 mark in league play and a ranking in the low 20s. These are not neutral resumes colliding, there is baggage on both sides, and it all comes back into focus with a rematch of that 86-83 thriller in Provo, when Arizona was number 1 and had the air of a team that could not really imagine losing. The rosters do not look as clean as they did back then. BYU walks into this one without Richie Saunders, the emotional battery of the team, who is out for the year after that rough ACL tear against Colorado. Arizona is missing its own pieces, with Koa Pete shelved by a lower leg muscle strain and Dwayne Aristote still out sick, so Tommy Lloyd has to manage a rotation that feels thinner than the box score suggests. It is a strange symmetry, both sides losing important wings at the same time, but the way each team absorbs that hit is very different. The efficiency numbers tell a story that the eye test already hints at. Arizona sits near the very top of the national rankings in overall efficiency, with an offense that grades in that top tier and a defense that belongs among the very best. BYU is good, very good even, but it sits a tier below, with an elite offense and a defense that hovers around solid rather than suffocating. Both like to play fast, landing in that upper group in tempo, yet only one combines pace with a defense that can actually throw a wrench into what opponents want to do possession after possession. On the glass, the gap grows even clearer. Arizona crashes the boards like it is personal, living around 44 rebounds a night on roughly 50% shooting from the field. That is not just about tall bodies, it is about the way the system keeps sending waves to the rim, wearing people down. BYU, now leaning harder on Ajay Debinsa and Robert Wright III to soak up usage, has to survive that constant pounding while also asking those two to carry the scoring. Tabiawaka, Motiejas Creves, and that long Arizona front line can keep coming, and that kind of size is exactly what exposes a road team that suddenly has fewer reliable options. McKell Center is not a friendly lab for experimenting with new combinations. Arizona faces the possibility of a 3-game losing streak for the first time since the 2019 to 2020 season, and that tends to flip a switch in a locker room, not calm anyone down. Coaches in that spot usually shorten the leash, lean into what they trust, and demand a statement more than a lesson. Even with Pete and Aristode in street clothes, Arizona still has enough two-way guards and enough bulk inside to keep throwing fresh bodies at BYU's primary creators. Over 40 minutes, that kind of physical, slightly irritated favorite at home is exactly the type that turns a close game into a gap that looks bigger than it felt for most of the night. As our first pick for this matchup, the Arizona Wildcats to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Both offenses arrive with the same basic idea: run, score, repeat. BYU's profile gives a pretty clear picture: around 86 points per night, near 49% from the field, mid-30s from deep, and about 40 rebounds, all wrapped in a pace that encourages early threes and quick decisions. Arizona pushes that concept even harder, sitting around 88 points per game, crossing the 50% mark from the field and piling up nearly 44 rebounds. One team leans into threes, the other lives in the paint and in transition, but both are wired to keep the scoreboard busy, not to nurse a low possession grind. The first meeting was the template for what happens when neither side really backs off that identity. Arizona walked out of Provo with that 86-83 win, and it did it by slicing up the interior, hitting close shots and forcing BYU to chase in space. BYU still pushed past 80 despite A.J. Debanza having a rough shooting night from the floor and needing to do most of his damage at the line. He kept drawing contact, and that constant whistle was a big part of how the total climbed without either offense feeling unbelievably hot. That whistle might be the sneaky key again. Debanza already sits near the top nationally in fouls drawn per 40 minutes, and in that first matchup he earned 16 free throw attempts all by himself. Free throws do not feel dramatic, but they stop the clock, add points, and let both offenses reset into another chance to score. Now, with Saunders out, the ball lives even more with Debanza and Wright. Desert previews have already pointed to Wright ripping off about 24 points per game lately with multiple 30-point explosions, including a 39 spot against Colorado. High-usage guards who live in pick and roll and isolation tend to pull games into that foul-heavy, whistle-heavy rhythm that quietly inflates totals. BYU's recent results show what that looks like on a scoreboard. Games have turned into track meets, with scores like 90-86 in overtime against Colorado, 99-94 at Baylor, 77-66 against Houston, 99-92 at Oklahoma State, and 90-82 at Kansas. You add all of that up and you land right around the mid-170s in combined points. Arizona's defense is better than some of those opponents, but the trade-off is that the Wildcats themselves push the pace, finish efficiently, and rarely walk the ball up. A faster game that features one elite offense and one slightly better elite offense, with stars who hunt contact and bigs who clean the glass and start the break, usually drifts toward a number that feels high on paper but very normal in real time. It becomes less about whether either team can score and more about whether anything actually slows them down. Fouls, free throws, quick shots, and long rebounds all pulling in the same direction. In that kind of environment, with both sides comfortable running, both sets of guards eager to attack, and both front courts living near the rim, the most natural script is another matchup where the scoreboard never really rests. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Kansas versus Oklahoma State. Kansas walks into Stillwater with the big brand, the ranking, and that vibe that they are supposed to be the grown-ups in the room. The schedule has been rough for them, full of heavyweights and loud gyms, and they usually look pretty comfortable in that kind of noise. On paper, they look like the safer choice, the side with the cleaner resume and the more polished style, the group that knows how to manage a game possession by possession. The thing is, this matchup is not being played on paper, it is being played inside Gallagher-Iba, where that orange crowd can turn a random weeknight into something that feels like a small-town festival wrapped around a basketball court. Oklahoma State's record in the conference does not exactly shine, but their personality in that building is very different from what the standings say at first glance. At home they run, they shoot with confidence, they run some more, and they lean into the chaos, and that approach has turned visits from ranked teams into long evenings for more than one favorite. They are far from flawless, the defense can spring leaks and the shot selection can be a little wild, but that volatility is exactly what a road favorite usually hates to see. Kansas prefers to lean on structure, on defense, and on that slow squeeze that takes the air out of a game little by little, and that rhythm is much easier to control at home than in a hostile conference gym where every whistle gets a reaction. You can almost see the contrast forming, one side trying to keep things tidy and composed, the other side feeding off emotion and pace and the feeling that nothing is really off the table. In that kind of setting, with the home team treating every loose ball like rent money and the building living on each call, those points attached to the underdog start to feel more like a safety net than a trap, especially when the favorite has to sweat every late possession instead of strolling to the finish. As our first pick for this matchup, the Oklahoma State Cowboys to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Kansas usually brings a steady, efficient offense, not always sprinting, but more than capable of shifting into a quicker gear when the opponent insists on playing with pace. Oklahoma State, on the other hand, tends to live on tempo, and their games in Stillwater often look like they are being played with an invisible shot clock that feels a little shorter than what is actually on the scoreboard. They push after misses, they are comfortable with quick threes, and that mindset, especially with their own fans yelling behind every break, naturally cranks up the number of trips up and down the floor. A team like Kansas that values structure can still thrive in that environment because clean sets and good spacing turn all that speed into layups, free throws, and kick-out looks that punish every lazy closeout. When one side loves to run and the other side is efficient enough to cash in those extra chances, the scoreboard can start moving in a hurry, sometimes faster than you realize sitting on the couch. Conference games also bring that familiar late-game pattern, where a close margin leads to long sequences of fouls, extra timeouts, and extra possessions, and the final minute suddenly stretches out for anyone who cares about the number rather than just the winner. Honestly, in a matchup that shapes up as fast, emotional, and full of swings, it takes a special kind of faith to expect a low-scoring grind to appear out of thin air. With both offenses having clear paths to find rhythm and with the pace more likely to tilt higher than slower, the pressure leans toward a game where the total figure drifts above the projection rather than quietly settling underneath it. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. St. John's versus Marquette. This matchup has that classic feel where one team walks in carrying all the pressure and still kind of enjoys it anyway. St. John's has turned into that group this season, rolling into Milwaukee with a record of 20-5 overall and 13-1 in league play, sitting in the teens in the rankings and riding an 11-game heater that has not exactly been quiet. The wild part is that they have been at their loudest away from home, undefeated in true road games, which is a pretty rare badge for a big-time program this late in the year. The way they get there is not flashy, it is stubborn. They lean into size and contact, more like a sledgehammer than a scalpel. Rick Pitino has built this roster so it lives in the paint, with guys like Zuby Ejiofor and Bryce Hopkins anchoring a heavy front court while Joson Sannon, Ian Jackson, and Oziah Sellers slash, cut, and crash around them instead of just floating around the arc. Honestly, it feels like every drive has an agenda, either finish through a chest or drag a whistle out of the possession. That is not just a vibe, the numbers back it up, with St. John's sitting near the very top of the country in free throw attempts per game and piling up close to 200 more free throw attempts than their opponents across the season, which means a big chunk of their scoring diet comes with the lane cleared and nobody in their face. Marquette walks into this one in a very different mood. Their record sits at 9-17 overall and 4-11 in league play, and the recent stretch has been rough, with more losses than wins and not a lot of rhythm on either end of the floor. They score in roughly the mid-70s on average and give up a touch more than that. The statistical profile of a team that is competitive most nights but constantly playing from behind the punch instead of throwing the first one. Defensively, they have slipped into the lower half of the national rankings in efficiency, which is not a fun place to be when you are dealing with a team that treats the paint like a job site. The first meeting between these two was not subtle at all. St. John's blew that game open at Madison Square Garden, hanging a score in the 90s while holding Marquette to something in the upper 60s and basically turning the second half into a long reminder. They carved up the interior, knocked down something like 6 out of every 10 two-point shots, and forced 19 turnovers, which is the type of number that makes coaches stare at the box score in silence for a minute. Oziah Sellers had his breakout that day with his best scoring night of the year, while Ejiofor filled up the stat sheet in the middle, and all of that came with Marquette missing Ben Gold through an ankle issue. Gold is back now, and that matters because he stretches the floor and gives them another skilled big, but he is coming back into a system that still has the same core issues with consistency and stops. Marquette still leans heavily on Nigel James Jr. running the show and Chase Ross on the wing, both confirmed fixtures in this current rotation, and when they are pressured, they still drift into those turnover flurries that cost them the first matchup. St. John's, on the other hand, has a coach talking like a perfectionist, with Pitino publicly saying this week that he thinks his group is only at 60 to 70% of what it could be, pushing for more defensive sharpness even as the wins pile up. That kind of message usually keeps a favorite from getting too comfortable, especially with March creeping up and seeding chatter starting to buzz. Analytics models lean toward a result where St. John's wins this one by several possessions, and that lines up with what your eyes suggest when you put their physical style, road swagger, and free-throw-heavy approach next to Marquette's leaky defense and turnover history. It does not mean the home crowd will not throw a punch, and it does not mean Marquette cannot hang around for stretches, but across 40 minutes the team that lives in the paint, owns the whistle, and has already proven it can blow this specific opponent out on a neutral floor looks far more likely to separate late. As our first pick for this matchup, the St. John's Red Storm to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The last time these two met, the scoreboard lit up with a combined number around the 160 mark, which naturally sticks in people's minds and pushes expectations toward another track meet. It is easy to remember that kind of game and assume the sequel has to follow the same script, especially when one team has been rolling and the other still has defensive problems. Here is the thing, St. John's has actually leaned harder into a style that can drag scoring down even as it helps them win more often. Their obsession with getting to the free throw line means possessions turn into long, physical battles with contact, stoppages, and players walking to the stripe over and over. They rank near the very top nationally in free throw attempts, and they have close to 200 more attempts than their opponents on the season, which is an absurd gap. That brings points, sure, but it also cuts into the rhythm of the game, especially late when a team that is ahead starts using most of the shot clock before attacking and then lives in the bonus. Those drawn-out final minutes feel dramatic, but do not always push the total into extreme territory because the clock melts while only one side is really taking shots. Marquette's profile does not automatically scream fireworks either. They usually land in that mid-70s neighborhood on offense while giving up a little more, so the baseline here is more steady scoring than relentless barrage. Their issues with turnovers against pressure also play a weird role. Turnovers can fuel quick points, but they can also lead to a coach slowing things down, calling more set plays, and trying to control tempo just to keep the game from snowballing again, especially against a team that already proved it can punish mistakes in a hurry. With Ben Gold back and their rotation more settled, there is a decent chance Marquette tries to be more deliberate, not less, so they can actually run what they want instead of getting dragged into chaos. Analytic models project a combined point total that sits a few ticks below what the betting market expects right now, which quietly tells you something. If the smart numbers land in one neighborhood and the posted number drifts a bit higher, you need either outrageous shot making, a totally different pace, or something like overtime to really blast past that gap. Nothing about the recent form of either team screams that a pace explosion is coming. St. John's just played a bruising, defensive-leaning win at Providence where the story was their toughness and their trips to the line, not some wild shooting showcase, and Marquette has looked more like an inconsistent, middle-of-the-pack offense than a volatile, high-ceiling one. So you end up with a picture where both teams absolutely can score, but the style of play, the free-throw-heavy rhythm, and the incentives for each side point toward a game that lives in an energetic but still reasonable scoring range instead of drifting into a full-on shootout. If this turns into a physical contest with plenty of whistles, longer possessions from the home team, and a road squad that is happy to squeeze the clock once it feels in control, the number on the board does not need to reach the same height as the first meeting for this matchup to feel convincing. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.